I'd like to call to order the special call commission meeting for October 22nd of 2024. I'm going to go ahead and start us off with an invocation today. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for all those that are serving on the commission. Thank you for the sportsmen and women of the Commonwealth. Please help us today make decisions that are going to be right for what we need to do for the state, and please look over us as we travel to and from in the coming weeks. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
I'd also like to go ahead and lead us in our pledge today. Please stand. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America,
to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming together today for the special call meeting. I know we have some of us in person there in Frankfurt, and some of us that were unable to get there, but we are joining remotely. So we'd just like to ask those of you that are joining remotely, if you're not speaking, if you could mute yourself, and then when you do need to speak, just unmute yourself so that we can all hear and understand each other. But with that being said, I will go ahead and go off this agenda. And the first item on the agenda is to, actually we need to do a roll call. And we are actually, our secretary is not on today, Jerry Farrell. So is there somebody down there that can do a roll call for me?
I have the roll call here if you'd like me to do it, Josh.
Greg, if you could do that, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Okay, District 1, Dr. Robin Floyd.
Here.
Virtual. District 2, Jeff Raymer.
Here.
District 3, Matt Rhodes.
Here, attending virtually.
District 4, Greg Cecil is virtual. District 5, Josh Lillard.
Here.
District 6, Jared Farrell. District 7, Chuck Mead.
Here.
And District 9, Walter Robinson.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum.
All right, thank you for doing that for me, Greg. So the first action item that we have on the agenda is to approve the meeting minutes from our August 30th, 2024 quarterly meeting.
I'll make a motion to accept.
Second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. So if we could do a roll call.
All right, Dr. Floyd.
Aye.
Jeff Raymer.
Aye.
Matt Rhodes.
Aye.
Greg Cecil's aye. Josh Lillard. I skip you till then, right? Jerry Farrell, not there. Chuck Mead.
Aye.
Walter Robinson.
Aye.
Ayes have it.
All right. Well, the next motion or the next item on our agenda today is to move to closed session for discussion to look over the approval of Commissioner Storm's personal service contract. So I would like to have a motion for us to move into closed session.
Motion made.
If I could do the intro, please.
Yeah, I mean, we need to do a motion first, and then after that, then we can do the intro. I believe is how it should work, isn't it?
Either way works. We just need to read it before we actually go into the closed session.
Okay. Well, so we got a motion and a second, so let's go through a roll call.
Did you have a second?
Walter.
Okay.
Greg, could you do a roll call for us for the moving into closed session, please?
Let me get all my stuff turned on, Josh. All right, Dr. Floyd.
Aye.
Jeff Raymer.
Aye.
Matt Rhodes.
Aye.
Greg Cecil's aye. Chuck Mead,
Aye.
Walter Robinson.
Aye.
Ayes have it.
All right, thank you. Stephen, if you could go ahead and read what you need to before we move into closed session, I would appreciate that.
All right, thank you. During the previous commission meeting, the commission entered into closed session to discuss the negotiations the commission chair conducted with Commissioner Storm regarding his potential reappointment and possible renewal of his contract. Upon exiting closed session, a motion was approved unanimously. A contract was drafted but not executed. Commissioner Storm requested one final adjustment regarding insurance that is yet to be discussed by the commission. A copy of the proposed employment contract to reappoint Commissioner Storm is attached to the detailed meeting agenda. All meetings of a quorum of the members of any public agency at which any public business is discussed or at which any action is taken by the agency shall be public meetings open to the public at all times except for specific exceptions listed in KRS 61-810 or otherwise provided for by law. The Commission's discussions, which may lead to the reappointment of Commissioner Storm as an employee of the Department, will require entering into closed session. KRS 61-815 requires notice of the general nature of the business to be discussed in the closed session, the reason for the closed session, and the provision of 61.810 that authorizes it to be publicly announced prior to entering closed session for most meeting exceptions. The proposed closed session pursuant to KRS 61.8101F, the Commission shall discuss the terms of the proposed personal service contract to reappoint Commissioner Storm. KRS 61.8101F authorizes closed sessions for discussions which might lead to the appointment, discipline, or dismissal of an individual employee. The potential reappointment of Commissioner Storm is authorized by KRS 150.061 subsection 1C. Upon the approved motion, the Commission will enter into closed session. The Commission shall not discuss any other matters, and no action shall be taken during the closed session. During the closed session, council and necessary members of staff will be present to advise the Commission.
Thank you, Stephen. So let's go ahead and move into closed session. You guys can let us know when we've done that, and then we'll move forward.
Serving people, conserving fish and wildlife. At the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, we take those words to heart. We are conservation officers, wildlife and fisheries biologists, conservation educators, engineering, IT, communication specialists, marketers, administrators, and customer service representatives. It's our mission to conserve, protect, and enhance Kentucky's fish and wildlife resources while providing outstanding opportunities for you to enjoy hunting, fishing, trapping, boating, shooting sports, wildlife viewing, and related activities. At Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, we protect the resource and public safety by enforcing hunting, fishing, and boating laws across Kentucky, provide public hunting and fishing access through the management of more than 1 million acres of natural areas and waterways, provide quality fishing opportunities for anglers close to home by annually stocking more than 5 million fish in public waters, build and maintain public boat ramps, shooting ranges, bank fishing access areas, and other public facilities, restore streams and wetlands on private and public lands using special grants, assist private landowners with fish and wildlife habitat improvement, inform and educate millions of youth and adults through education and outreach programs. Not only are we responsible for the conservation of the few dozen species in Kentucky that are hunted, fished, or trapped, we are responsible for all of our state's incredibly diverse animal species, nearly 1,000 of them. All of this is accomplished with funding through user fees and grants instead of state taxes. The majority of the department's revenue comes from the sale of licenses and permits, federal funds, excise taxes on outdoor-related equipment, and boat registrations. Hunting, fishing, and other wildlife-related recreation generate nearly $6 billion in total economic impact to the Commonwealth, supporting about 70,000 jobs. All of us at Kentucky Fish and Wildlife seek to be good stewards of the great outdoors, leaving it in better shape than we found it. Passionate and mission-focused, that's who we are. Serving people, conserving fish and wildlife resources, that's what we do.
Got one. Get him in there, Annie. Get her, Sadie.
Get in there, Sadie.
Jeez.
There's turkeys all around him.
Double point. They're in there. There they go. I can't think anything I'd rather do, so.
Serving people, conserving fish and wildlife. At the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, we take those words to heart. In our Engineering, Infrastructure, and Technology division, computer programmers, engineers, skilled technicians, heavy equipment operators, administrative specialists, and project managers carry out the design, construction, and maintenance of the agency's buildings and facilities across the state, as well as manage department software and website functionality that are critical to our agency's data processing requirements. The Kentucky Fish and Wildlife website, fw.ky.gov, is visited by more than 2 million users each year. The creation and maintenance of the electronic applications, databases, and content that keeps the website operating smoothly is dependent on our highly trained computer programmers. Our IT team manages the department's hunting and fishing licensing system, telecheck and other harvest databases, and mobile platforms, working diligently to sustain and modernize technologies that improve functionality for you, the end user of our products and services. They ensure that our licensing system meets customers' needs. Engineering and maintenance staff work across the state to construct, service, and enhance the infrastructure used by hundreds of thousands of recreational participants across the Commonwealth every year. This includes roads, parking lots, buildings, shooting ranges, boat ramps, docks, and canoe and kayak launches. Often working with local governments seeking a new boating or fishing access point in their community, the EIT division provides oversight and technical guidance for the project, designs, gathers permits, and procures agency signage, leading the project from start to finish. The division currently maintains about 170 boat ramps and 24 agency-owned dams statewide. Recent projects include an accessible fishing pier at Green River Lake and a boat ramp at Shawnee Park in Louisville. Facilities updates are ongoing projects of importance because they provide functional access and spaces for the public to enjoy our natural resources and for staff to work and interact with the public. These projects are wide-ranging in scope. Recent examples include the new archery range at Kentucky Fish and Wildlife headquarters, the dining hall at Camp Curry, and the renovation of our Central Fisheries Annex office and laboratory. Shooting ranges, wildlife management area roads and parking lots, life jacket loaner stations, moist soil impoundments for waterfowl and other wetland wildlife, and other such facilities made for hunters, anglers, and other recreationists are built and maintained by the EIT division. This work is vital in promoting increased site accessibility and safety for folks that utilize these resources. The Engineering, Infrastructure, and Technology Division is also the home for boots on the ground maintenance staff that beautifies and maintains these properties in sun, rain, sleet, or snow. Although mowing, trash pickup, building maintenance, and unforeseen repairs are inevitably required on facilities across the state is not glamorous work, this upkeep and maintenance is an integral part of our success. We are Kentucky Fish and Wildlife's Engineering, Infrastructure, and Technology Division. We take pride in planning, constructing, maintaining, and repairing the facilities that ensure access for hunters, anglers, trappers, boaters, and wildlife watchers who reside in or visit our state. We're also focused on continuous improvement of access to information and services the department provides through technology, all to make it easier for you to enjoy your favorite outdoor activities. Passionate and mission-focused, that's who we are. Serving people, conserving fish and wildlife, that's what we do.
Serving people, conserving fish and wildlife. At the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, we take those words to heart. In our law enforcement division, conservation officers and administrative specialists carry out the agency's mission-critical enforcement and education activities.
We're going to talk to you guys for a little bit about this firearm.
Promoting public safety and appropriate use of the state's fish and wildlife resources is a division legacy that traces back more than a century. Conservation officers work tirelessly alongside our fisheries and wildlife professionals on private and public lands and waters to help restore, protect, and conserve fish and wildlife. They have been instrumental in the restoration success stories of species such as white-tailed deer, wild turkey, freshwater fishes and mussels, bald eagles, and elk. Kentucky conservation officers are sworn peace officers who enforce all laws of the Commonwealth, with a primary focus on fishing, hunting, trapping, boating, and commercial uses of fish and wildlife. They are some of the most highly trained law enforcement professionals in the nation. All recruits receive 20 weeks of basic training, 14 weeks of training in the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Academy,
Drop it. I'm going to tase you if you don't drop that stick.
and 12 weeks of on-the-job training with a field training officer. The Law Enforcement Division's policing of commercial uses of fish and wildlife helps to protect the delicate balance between conservation and sustainable use of vital public resources. Conservation officers also pursue those who violate Kentucky's laws and thereby disregard the principles of fair chase and ethical stewardship. The poacher's illegal take of fish and wildlife steals opportunity from everyone who enjoys these animals legally.
If you come out tomorrow any other time, get that fishing license, okay? All right, sir. Be careful.
Have a good day.
You too.
From the back roads and backwaters and all areas in between, conservation officers are committed to ensuring our outdoors are a safe place for sportsmen and women to recreate in the Commonwealth. Tips regarding suspected unlawful activities related to fish, wildlife, or boating are welcome into the Law Enforcement Division. Conservation officers investigate your tips, aiming to cut down on potential poaching or other illegal activities. Tips may be reported by phone, text, or smartphone app. To report a tip, call your local Kentucky State Police Dispatch or 1-800-25-ALERT. Text 847-411, type the keyword KFW Law, plus the details of your tip, or use the KFW Law smartphone app. It's available in your app store. Your tips often result in cases that help discourage illicit activities. Conservation officers are also deeply ingrained in their communities across the Commonwealth. From school visits to assisting with toy and food drives, or youth fishing events to hosting special hunting opportunities for youths.
We just gently press the trigger. Good job.
They are eager to assist when there is a need. When raging floods or tornadoes hit Kentucky communities, disrupting essential services and putting citizens at risk, conservation officers are among the first to be called because of our specialized training, equipment, and expertise. Our officers don't hesitate to provide emergency help to those in harm's way, even traveling outside the state to assist those affected by hurricanes or other natural disasters. They are the lead first responders on more than 2,000 miles of navigable streams and hundreds of lakes statewide. Kentucky conservation officers spend thousands of hours annually on boating enforcement, helping to ensure impaired boaters don't negatively affect the recreational use of our waterways. The environment our conservation officers work in daily also puts them in harm's way. Sadly, 10 officers have lost their lives protecting the natural resources and people of the Commonwealth. These 10 officers represent the immense dedication it takes to serve in this role, and forever reminds the public of the dangers that Kentucky conservation officers face every day. In 2014, a fallen officers memorial was dedicated on the campus of Kentucky Fish and Wildlife in Frankfort, and every year we honor those individuals that paid the ultimate sacrifice. We are the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Law Enforcement Division. We enforce the laws and regulations pertaining to the Commonwealth's fish and wildlife resources, protecting an industry that generates $6 billion to our state's economy, from the Appalachian Mountains in the east to the Mississippi River in the west, so that these resources may be safely and sustainably enjoyed by current and future generations. Passionate and mission-focused, that's who we are. Serving people, conserving fish and wildlife, that's what we do.
Serving people, conserving fish and wildlife. At the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, we take those words to heart. Our Fisheries Division is comprised of fisheries biologists and technicians, fish hatchery managers, fisheries researchers, and administrative specialists. We focus on aquatic species and their habitats across the Commonwealth. Large lakes, vast reservoirs, small farm ponds, open flowing rivers, secluded mountain streams. Kentucky has them all. These waterways span some 215,000 surface acres of water. Public spaces that more than 250 species of aquatic animals call home. And every year, more than 500,000 people enjoy the excellent fishing and other recreational opportunities these diverse waterways afford. Conserving and enhancing these aquatic resources and providing opportunities for their public enjoyment are the two main functions of the Fisheries Division. The primary strategies we use to manage Kentucky's fisheries include habitat improvement, fisheries research, stream restoration, fish stocking, invasive species control, and management of fish populations through regulating fish harvest. Fish habitat improvement usually involves either fostering beneficial aquatic plants or placing physical structures in waterways to provide places for fish and their prey to reproduce or take cover. Most of our public lakes are decades old, and the structure of their habitats has decomposed or has been washed away over time. Providing new fish
Thanks everybody for bearing with us while we were in closed session there. So now that we're out of closed session, go back to the agenda. We have an action item here to approve for the approval of Commissioner Storm's personal service contract is there anybody that would like to make a motion?
I'd like to make the motion.
Okay, go ahead.
I move to approve the proposed reappointment of Commissioner Rich Storm and to accept the proposed contract as attached to today's agenda.
All right, is there a second to that?
Second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Craig, if you could please do a roll call.
Dr. Floyd,
Aye.
Jeff Raymer,
Aye.
Matt Rhodes,
Aye.
Greg Cecil's aye. Chuck Mead,
Aye.
and Walter Robinson.
Aye.
Ayes have it.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. So with that, we're going to move on to the next item on our agenda, and this is for our informational items to review of Kentucky CWD response plan and implementation.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Ben.
So we will go ahead and jump right in with our item, and I'll be presenting, and I have Deputy Commissioner Gabe Jenkins here along with me who can chime in and help if I miss anything or help me answer questions, and we have some other experts in the room as well if there are questions or conversations. But jumping right in, we're here to discuss a CWD detection in Breckinridge County. And we have a presentation here, if we can advance it. Nathan, we might have to have you manually advance that for us. There you go. What we do know is this was an adult female white-tailed deer harvested inside a captive cervid facility. If you're not familiar with the term captive cervid facility, you may be familiar with the term high fence, a high fence operation. So that's what we're discussing here, where basically you erect a fence around a property to hold animals in. We received the confirmation of a positive CWD sample. The sample was collected as part of the Kentucky Department of Agriculture's testing protocol. So here we have a map, and the red star indicates the approximate location of this positive. And if you'll note on the map, going further west there, just as a refresher, that's our West Kentucky surveillance zone, the little brown plus sign or cross there. That indicates the Ballard County 2023 positive detection in a wild deer. And then the pink color indicates the 8-county surveillance zone that encompasses that. Just a really quick overview of the captive cervid industry and the regulations and how it's regulated. This industry is regulated jointly between the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Agriculture. So the Department of Fish and Wildlife oversees the fencing of the facility and some facility requirements and some tagging and identification requirements. The Department of Agriculture oversees the transportation, the movement of captive deer around the state, disease monitoring and testing, and some tagging and identification requirements. So as you know, we have an agency response plan that's been in place for many years, and this is our guiding document for how we approach CWD responses and management. And just a few highlights of what we've done to date on this one. Number one, first and foremost, notification of stakeholders, and we did that right out of the gate as soon as we learned about this through press releases, through notification of key constituents, notifying the public, our sportsmen and women, partnering agencies, local businesses, processors, taxidermists, you name it. We're trying to get the word out and making everyone aware, being very open and transparent about that. Also, we're working closely to assess deer densities, the number of deer in the area, particularly in close proximity to this facility. Our main goal is to collect as many CWD samples from wild deer as possible, because our goal is to determine if this has spread outside of the fence of this facility. And as this photo indicates, There are interactions between deer in these facilities and wild deer. The deer on the left is a deer inside of a fence. The deer on the right is a wild deer. And you can see that they are certainly having interactions there. We're also involved in an epidemiologic investigation. Really, Department of Agriculture is taking the lead on this, but what we're most interested in is the movement of captive deer and learning more about deer that have left this facility and where they may have gone around the state, and a lot of those results are pending. And the next map will kind of explain why we're interested in that movement. Each of these dots represents a captive cervid facility around the state, and deer are regularly moved around facilities within the state. So it's very important for us to learn where the red star is, if there were deer that left this facility, where they went, so that we can begin investigating further and doing our due diligence there.
So I'll also point out here too, we can no longer receive captive deer from outside of Kentucky. Previously, the state of Indiana, they were able to bring deer in from, but now that Indiana has detected CWD, it has closed that importation, and so all deer movements are only within the state, so they're not receiving anything from out of state effective earlier this year.
Okay, good. So as far as a surveillance zone, this would be our proposal for a surveillance zone around this area, and that would encompass Breckenridge, Meade, and Hardin County. And really the way this was derived, when you have, according to our response plan, when you have a detection in a captive facility, you immediately draw a 5-mile radius around that detection, which becomes your management zone, and then you draw a 15-mile radius around that detection, and any county that touches that 15-mile radius then becomes part of your surveillance zone, which is why we've listed Breckenridge, Meade, and Hardin on there. That differs a little bit from a wild detection. If you think about Ballard County, what we've discussed last year, the size of those circles actually doubles for a wild. So it's a 10-mile and a 30-mile radius for a wild, and that's for obvious reasons. A wild deer is moving. You don't know exactly where it's going. In theory, this deer was in captivity behind a fence, so the movement should have been limited there. So what does it mean to enact a CWD surveillance zone? That triggers a few things. One being no baiting or feeding within the zone with the intent of limiting congregation among animals. Also, there would be no deer carcass and high-risk parts movement out of the zone. So what are high-risk parts? That would really be head, skull with brain matter, spine. It is okay to debone meat and remove deboned meat or cleaned skull products, cleaned skull caps with no brain matter on those. It's also important to note that within that 3-county zone, you can move deer around. So for example, you harvest a deer in Meade County, you could take that deer to Breckenridge, or you could take that deer to Hardin. So you can move within the zone, you just couldn't move outside of the zone. It's also very important to note that if you harvested a deer outside of that zone, just throwing out a county, Franklin County because we're here, and you wanted to transport that deer back over to Hardin, to Meade, to Breckenridge, that's okay. You can do that. You just can't take deer from the zone out, and the intent of that is to try to prohibit the spread should this be more widespread than we realize. Also, as far as wildlife rehabilitation, there would be no fawn rehabilitation within the zone.
But one thing I'll point out here too is that these restrictions are already in regulation. So for CWD surveillance zone, these go into effect immediately. So upon discussions today and any approvals that are granted, this would go into place immediately. So we don't have to enact a regulation change to go this route.
So as far as next steps go, you've heard this say this time and time again within our Ballard County, West Kentucky surveillance zone, and we want to continue this taking a hunters first approach. So we really want to rely on our hunters. Our hunters are our most valuable asset. They're our biggest ally when it comes to this to help us collect CWD samples, and we want to be we want to help our hunters as much as possible, and we're going to rely on our hunters. Right now, we have no hunting season date changes currently planned for 2024, so the season structure right now is proposed to remain the same. One important thing to note here, no mandatory check stations for this surveillance zone, and that's what we're proposing right now. And the reason why that would differ from West Kentucky is because this is really a different landscape. When you're looking at these 3 counties, we have a lot of deer, but we have a lot of deer hunters, and we have a high harvest, which is very much to our advantage. So we can really rely on our hunters to help us collect these samples using some alternative methods. Obviously, roadkill we'll be doing, but working with our partnering processors, taxidermists. We have some voluntary programs in place now with freezer locations around the area where a hunter can drop off a head in a freezer to get a deer tested. We have a new mail-in kit program where we can teach people how to pull a sample. They mail it in for a result. So given the high harvest and the number of hunters that we have here and the number of options we have, we're really trying to not burden our hunters, and we think we can get the samples that we need in other ways. Now, I will say we may be reevaluating this next season, and that may change. If we don't get the samples that we need, we may have to look at like a mandatory check station. But right now, that's what we're proposing. Definitely want to highlight that no targeted removal. Targeted removal meaning, agency coming in, shooting deer that you hear other states do. We're not proposing that. Also, we have a public meeting right now scheduled on November 7th in Breckinridge County to work with local sportsmen and women and provide information there, and more details to come on that as they develop. And this just solidifies kind of what I said about the harvest totals and the number of deer that are harvested there. It's a 5-year average for those 3 counties. The far right column in bold shows you the numbers, the average number of deer that are harvested there. So these are some higher harvest counties for us. And then below shows some estimated deer densities. We had crews on the ground even last night working on deer densities using some thermal technology that we have and estimating numbers to get us a better handle on what we're looking at and number of deer that we have in these areas.
So I'll step in here and just a couple points that I'd like to make before we open it up to kind of the last questions in our request. But because this is a special call meeting and we're dealing directly with action items, we're not doing public comments, but we did receive a couple comments related to these. Overall, they were supportive of the initiatives, but expressed concern on baiting, on what that looked like on the ban and baiting, and also questions related to the movement of carcasses and what that might do to the industry on the taxidermist and processor side. And so we will be responding to those comments, and we'll be sure to share those with you guys so you see that in our response. But I did want to highlight that we did receive those overnight that are related to this item.
We can't have public comments.
You can.
Okay.
So, in closing, a request for the commission would be to establish a CWD surveillance zone for Breckinridge, Hardin, and Meade counties. With that, I will hand it back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Gabe. I appreciate your guys' information there. And we did receive some emails last night also on the commission, so probably the same ones that you guys received. So I think it is good to note that deer can still be brought into those areas if there's a processor in that area, as you alluded to.
I'd like to ask for just a brief public comment. Colonel A. Mike, what's the public thinking?
Well, I don't, Commissioner Meade, I don't know that I can speak for the whole public. Josh, are you okay if I talk for a second?
Yeah, if you could keep it brief.
Definitely keep it brief.
Can we get to an area where we can all hear them at?
Just step up. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a meeting in 3rd District last night. Matt Rhodes was generous enough to give up his time and meet with the 3rd District LKS people, and some other sportsmen were there. The phone calls I received back from that and the phone calls I got from my 2 board of directors, the concern is that the department is absolutely not a concern. everybody's happy the department's doing what Gabe and Ben just said. The concern is that a lot of sportsmen have put a lot of time, money, energy, and effort into their hunting properties for this season. And that really starts between now and December 22nd, the end of second muzzleloader. So we got about 8 or 10 weeks here to let these hunters harvest as many deer as possible without impacting their setup. So the only rub right now, Chuck, is if we stop, I'm just gonna say it straight up, a lot of hunters don't use woodsmanship anymore as like they used to. They're hunting straight over a feeder or some kind of mineral, and they've hung their stands there and everything. The concern now is if we stop that today, we've ruined them for the rest of the season, and you could really upset some folks because they go in and hang a stand somewhere else, and some people can't even get into their mineral right now because it's in a field that hasn't been harvested. So that if y'all was to outlaw it today, they've got to find a way to get in there with a front end loader. I had 2 farmers that I talked to, one sitting in the room who's really concerned that he'd be in trouble the first day because he's leased that field. It's not his crop to harvest. He's going to get a check off of it, but he'd have to run a front end loader over that ag to fill that mineral. So it's just the exigent circumstance and timing. Thank you.
Chairman Litter, can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. So my understanding going through the slide deck was you're saying that there's no proposed hunting changes for this hunting year. Is that right, Ben?
That's correct, sir. Yes.
Does that also include the baiting provisions?
No, that would not. So the way this works now, if a surveillance zone goes into effect, then the baiting ban, the carcass restrictions would go into effect.
The baiting ban would go into effect.
Right, and what we meant by no changes to the season, we wouldn't be proposing any, early seasons, late seasons at this point. So same season framework.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to follow up with a little commentary, is because I feel like how we respond to this issue is going to be vital in managing the risk communication and the threat that we actually know exists today. The only deer that we know exists that's positive was in a fenced facility, so we don't even know that we have an incident rate or prevalence rate within the wild deer herd, but we do know that we want to try to sample as many deer as possible. And I think, by people hunting over bait and using bait and other attractants, it increases that potential exposure. It also makes sure that hunters go out into the field, I think, but having the ability to have those encounters with the deer are vitally important if we want to harvest a number of deer to be able to have an effective sample size, correct?
So, that's a great statement, Matt, and I think that many state agencies are having this discussion when it comes to CWD management and what does bait look like for cervids. And ultimately, you have to balance the risk of the risk of infection with increase in harvest to get those samples. And it's the risk versus reward that we have to consider and think about. Conversely, I'll also say that it's not apples to apples in how we do things in the western part of the state and here, but I also will point out that when we responded and enacted our CWD response plan due to the detection close to us in Tennessee, we did not have the disease here in Kentucky. It was close. We did enact a feeding and baiting ban then. So I think it's a very similar instance and why it's in our plan that we would do that to limit the potential spread. We know the disease is on the landscape, and we know modes of transportation of that disease from animal to animal and how that looks. So there's a high probability it's in the environment, it's on there. And so anything we can do right out of the gate to decrease the chances of infection and the spread of the disease is paramount for us. And we're all bringing up great points on what does this look like in the middle of the season. I will also say when we did this because of Tennessee, the season had already started. We had our response in September. And so we had the same communication, we had the same discussions a couple of years ago on what does that look like because hunters were already deer hunting. And so that's when our communications team had to really put it into full gear, and ones that we will be doing as well on these have changed, this is what this looks like, and here's the reasons why. And We don't want to be a burden to our hunters, but also they need to understand the risk and try to work with everybody to be a good steward of the resource.
And I agree with you. Unfortunately, we're assuming a risk that may not be present because of the nature of the facility. Obviously, it's in the environment in that enclosed facility, but we don't know that it's out there in our wild herd just yet. And I feel like the only way we will know that is through getting a good sample size to be able to determine that. And I think trying to make this change right now creates a lot of potential unintended consequences for us. But I've got a whole host of other questions, but I'm going to defer to the other commission members and let them ask some questions.
Josh, I got it. Yeah, I've got a couple questions, if I may, Josh. One is, how old was the deer? How long had it been in that facility? When do we have an idea when it contracted? The other is define bait. Are we talking food plot? Are we talking, define bait for me just a little more also, if you would, please.
So I can speak on the deer first. We are awaiting the exact details from Department of Agriculture to be confirmed at this point. We've reported everything that we know to be factual and true. And so we're waiting on that official confirmation of the age of the deer and those things that you asked, Commissioner Cecil. So that's to be determined. Bait would be the placement of agricultural products such as corn, grain, mineral. It would not include food plots, any wildlife plantings. We would also exclude bird feeders. That was one thing that we mentioned. If you have bird feeders around your home, we know deer like to come eat those. That's not our intention there. It's the willingly placement of that substance on the ground for the attractant of deer. We do have that defined, but I do not have that on top off my head to be able to speak to that. So,
how long is from infection to the death of the deer that's with CWD? How long is that period?
So that is an unknown currently. We know that from the time that they are exposed to the time that they exhibit symptoms can be anywhere from a year to a year and a half. And so that's just exhibiting symptoms. Death changes. I mean, and a lot of times they can die from CWD, and they do die from CWD, but many times secondary or other diseases get them, or their increased risk for harvest or predation or hit by a vehicle increases. So there are many factors that cause death with chronic wasting disease influencing their with CWD influencing their survival. So let me read the definition of bait in reg. Bait or feed of wildlife inside the surveillance zone, so except for normal agricultural practices, including food plots, also exempt hanging bird feeders within the curtilage of their home, and exempt fur-bearer trapping attractants except for grain, salt, or mineral. Let me read you the definition of bait quickly, because I believe it's in there. And this is regulation 301 KAR 2172. I don't see bait in there. It's not in that one. Apologize. It's in the feeding of wildlife reg. So give me a second and I'll look that up.
We had black powder season last weekend. Have we tested any deer in the zone? And has there been any significant sign?
Yes, so we have tested deer. We had people set up at processors, some of our partnering processors, and we're able to get several samples, so which was great. To be determined on those results. It'll take a little while. They have to be sent off to the lab, so it could take a couple weeks before we get those back.
Do we control the time this goes into effect? Is that what it is, Commissioner? We can make it go into effect tomorrow, today?
We do.
Okay.
Dr. Floyd, Commissioner Floyd, since you're in the first district where we currently have the restrictions, I'd be interested in entertaining your comments of what it was like when we implemented those restrictions back then, what you feel like, the hunter rate harvest was and all that stuff. You could just give us your input there.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I think the big point that needs to be made is when we first implemented our CWD plan, and that little doe was first found to be CWD positive in Henry County, only 8 miles from the border of Kentucky, we did not ask people to dig up or cover up their mineral licks. We just asked them not to add any more. And I think that's a real reasonable approach in this situation too. You just don't add any more. Now, obviously, some minerals still going to be there, but I think that is asking a whole lot of the folks. That being said, in the area just across the state line, which is Tennessee, from where that deer was actually found, baiting is not allowed, and there's still plenty of people that do hunt. So I'm not sure, if somebody already has bait out, it might be difficult for them to take that back up, but I think the same thing would apply with minerals. Just say don't put any more out.
I can read to you the definition of feeding if you would like. I do have that's in regulation. To willingly, wantonly, or knowingly deposit, distribute, or scatter of shelled, shucked, or unshucked corn, millet, milo, safflower seed, sunflower seed, thistle, wheat, or other grain, or any manufactured feed or food product to be consumed by wildlife, and does not mean the establishment and maintenance of plantings for wildlife, foods found scattered solely as the result of normal agricultural planting practices or harvesting practices.
Josh, I think if we think that this is the only case that we've got and that deer was the only one that's positive in this area, I think it's wishful thinking. And I hope for the best, but I think we need to prepare for the worst. If this deer was 3 or 4 years old and she was in a different facility and moved to this facility, she's been in contact with other deer through that whole time. At a minimum, I think what y'all propose to do is it, like I said, it's a minimum, and it's kind of a wait and see thing. This could devastate the deer herd in the state of Kentucky.
Mr. Chair, may I speak briefly? So, we have been a very fortunate state to watch this happen in other states and see successes and failures. And it's quite depressing when this gets out of control. We are at a point that there's potential prevention. Potential. I only say potential because we don't know, as Jeff iterated. This is a critical time for us to be strong. And I can tell you, you can't sit here as leaders and win in every scenario. You can't please one faction. You're going to disappoint. But this is critical because when we get to a point where we're looking at CWD in 120 counties or 50 counties, we're at a point where it's monitor, it's test, it's a systematic breakdown of what we historically would do. Our resources, our wildlife division, our fisheries biologists will be involved in this. Our agency will be involved. So I just say it's a critical time, and we do hope for a best case scenario. Another key point, we aren't the agency that would go in and depop a served facility. That's not what we do. Now, I got asked that earlier today. Would we go in and depopulate that facility? That's not what we do. We will have conversations with ag, and we will have many updates related to this, and I'm certain of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And if I just want to make one point to Commissioner Raymer's statement on the movements, we are confident there have been movements in and out of that facility. and that we have been informed of that. It's just that the severity and where they have gone and where they have come from is yet to be given to us. So we're waiting that, and we will hopefully get that as soon as possible and use that information, but we're confident there have been those movements.
So I think it begs the question, has the Department of Ag participated or shared a situation report on this, and or do they plan to share a situation report so that we have all of the information at hand in order to be able to make a well-informed decision?
We have been in conversations with the Department of Ag from the very beginning, and they are working to get us all the correct and factual information, and that is the things that we have requested is the facts. And so we want to ensure that what we say is true, and we have asked for that, and we'll get that as soon as they provide that to us.
So I know that there's a sharing of duties and responsibilities here, but when you're talking about implementing the surveillance zone and doing sampling and so forth and banning baiting, does that also apply to the captive servant facility?
It's a great question that will be open to their Office of State Veterinarian and their state vet to make those determinations based upon the movements and the quarantines and what they deem is necessary based upon their investigations.
So, I'm sorry, Greg, go ahead, I'll wait.
No, it's, Commissioner, could I make a statement? I guess one of my biggest concerns here, as I think about this, you said in your presentation, Ben, that the public meeting wouldn't happen until November 7th, correct?
Yes, sir.
I don't know how we implement now something as drastic as a ban on baiting when the public really hasn't had a chance to have their public forum. You know, what are we going to do to our law enforcement officers as they're going out and trying to monitor this situation, and people don't realize or know that are not connected as we are to this situation. The average guy out there that doesn't even know there was a CWD case in the state of Kentucky or in their area or in their zone, and they have bait or mineral out, where the main modern gun season is upon us. And come November 7th, that it's there, you know? So I'm not sure how the public could respond to that in order to fit their practices and what they're doing in a time frame that we're speaking of. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
So I'll reference and then I'll let Ben kick it in. You know, we are status quo from how we were 3 years ago. And so we brought this recommendation to the commission and implemented these things before we ever had an on-the-ground public meeting. And so at that point, we then did an all-out communications blitz to every way that we could to inform our hunters about the new restrictions that were out there. We took an education-first approach to where we were trying to educate our hunters on the changes and the why. And so we encouraged our officers to use discretion and realizing that getting the word out to every hunter is impossible. But I will say from our experience a handful of years ago, we did a fantastic job. And we had fantastic compliance. And we asked them to come to check stations. And that was really burdensome to them. In this case, we're not. And so I do believe that, you know, we are, like you said, a couple weeks away from modern gun with the majority of our hunters hit the woods. But our communications team has been there and done this, and I think are up for the task on doing the very best they can to get this information out. And like I said, we're focusing on the education component. We want to inform our folks and to cut down or reduce the risk of disease transmission and the spreading of that disease. If it was something that we felt that was not as necessary, we would not be recommending this to you today.
The first case we had in Dr. Floyd's district, how long was it between the time that we were notified and that the program was implemented? What was the date's time frame on that?
That's a great question. Dr. Casey is here with us and may be able to speak to some of those dates because it's fuzzy.
It was a week or two.
Yeah.
It wasn't long. We found out about it in early September. September the 10th and September the 14th ring a bell for commission dates. I don't know why.
Are you talking about the first detection or the one in Ballard?
The one in Ballard.
And that's where
the
this
Ballard
was.
one,
the
we found
very
out the lab notified us in December. So that was when we got the confirmation from the IHC test, and then we implemented, working on getting the public meeting. That was January 7th or something, because we had to have it within 30 days of that detection. And the surveillance zone is what we discussed in that meeting.
So George, I was just going to say two major differences there. One, we already had a surveillance zone to the south in 5 counties, so we were already kind of up and running there, so it was, but two, it was the timing, when that came at the end of the season, there really wasn't as much communication needed because deer season was wrapping up, whereas now we're hitting it right at the beginning.
Are these deer tested twice just to be on the?
So captive are done a little differently. Captive don't do the ELISA. They're not allowed to for the USDA program standards. So they have to go for an IHC confirmation, which is the gold standard. And so it was confirmed. They also have to test the OBEX and the lymph nodes. With that, the OBEX was the only one that tested, or the lymph node tested positive, which tells us that it's probably an earlier detection of the disease versus if it was OBEX and lymph node. The OBEX means the disease has been present for significantly longer in the progression of the disease.
So there's very little chance it was a false positive.
It's very little chance.
Gentlemen, I appreciate your questions. And Robin, I see you have one. Just bear with me 1 second here. I understand a lot of the comments that we received, the comments that was made in the meeting today, and some of the concerns that people have as far as, banning bait. It might seem extreme, but also I don't want to leave, the resource in a position to where if we don't make an extreme measure today, that it could potentially harm us further down the road. We don't know what we don't know, but I would hate for us to not make the right decision, and unfortunately, when we had the opportunity to do so, and then it really have a negative effect, years from now. So that's all I'd like to say. And then Robin, I think you had a question, and then after that, I'd like to go ahead and look at entertaining a motion.
I was just going to say 2 things. Number one, as far as education, the department did regarding the CWD zone and the restrictions for at the very first, we had a 94% compliance of folks that brought their deer physically to check stations of those that harvested the deer, which tells me that the word did get out there. People knew about it. The second thing I would like to say is I believe the first case of CWD that was found in Henry County, Tennessee, was in the summer of 2020, and we didn't have an occurrence in Kentucky until the one in Ballard County, which was in November of 23, I believe. And so that's a lot slower movement of CWD than you see than you have seen in a lot of other states. And so I'm not saying that we know for sure that our restrictions work, but it sure looks like they didn't hurt anything.
All right, are there any other comments?
Yes, sir. Chairman, I've got a couple anyway. The first question that I have is, I think I understood in the initial portion of the presentation that the CWD guidance information has been codified in a regulation, so it's an all or nothing. Is that correct?
That's correct. If a CWD surveillance zone were enacted today, then those regulations would kick in, meaning the baiting and the carcass removal and the rehabilitation.
So the commission either votes for all or nothing. You can't. There's not provisions that you can say you would like to except from that, if you vote for it, we go with what's codified in the regulation.
I believe that would be accurate.
I'm assuming that's the case. Second question I have is, if you implement this, for how long does it stay in effect?
That's a very good question, and it's one that we've had some internal discussions on. It is not clearly laid out in our plan. Initial thinking on this, if you have a wild detection, you may be under a surveillance zone permanently because it's a wild deer. You have no idea where that deer has been, how much of the environment is impacted. A captive deer may be a little bit different. There may be some time restrictions you could place on that, given that it's behind a fence, and if you don't find it anywhere else for a number of years, that may be a discussion point where the zone could be lifted in a captive situation. We don't have that explicitly spelled out right now.
But I agree with you. I think it's a game changer if it's in the wild herd versus in this fenced environment. But we do know from the picture that was shown that they can have interaction through the fence even. So, it's a challenging point. I think we're at an inflection point here when you start responding to these things in certain ways. One question that I would have for Commissioner Floyd was, what was the hunter participation rate post the restrictions that were put in place, and then secondarily to the department, what was the harvest rate after we put in the restrictions down in the CWD surveillance zone down in Zone 1 or District 1?
I can only tell you the number of deer harvested dropped that initial year. They dropped about 26% over the 5-year average before that. Okay, and so since that time, I believe, and that started in 2020, so I think by 2023, that had pretty much rebounded. It was back about even with what it was beforehand. So, but there was an initial 26% drop, which is concerning, obviously. And it's especially concerning because in my district, it's almost all ag land. And so then, of course, you're having fewer deer harvested. You got more farmers calling saying the deer are eating up my crops. So, so that's why it's so important to take as many deer as possible.
Right.
Commissioner Rhodes, I said we can provide you that data. We have those reports to be factual on what that did in the zone. We'll caution to speak directly to the zone and not look at it as a whole statewide too. If the zone declined, we also need to compare that. What did the statewide do to see if there was just a bad weather, bad season? But we definitely did see a decline in the first year as to normal. But we do have that data, and we'll be glad to share that with the entire commission on what we saw in the western part of the state.
Great. I have one other question, then I'll defer to others. But with regard to deer density that's in that region, that 3-county region, what is the sample size that's going to be needed to truly get a prevalence rate, if any, within that 3-county region? I know when you talk about statistics, usually they say a sample size of 30 is good enough to get to a normality of data with regard to distribution. That's not nearly enough as it relates to this. So do you all have an idea of how many samples we need to get in this first year to try to determine a prevalence?
Dr. Casey, I hate to put you on the spot, but have you crunched those numbers at this point?
So I'm waiting for updated deer density estimates to get a more accurate number. And there's kind of 2 different levels that we're looking at. So from a county-wide, we really want to get, upwards of 300 deer or more from each county. And that's to look at the whole level, trying to detect at a 1% prevalence. So if, a deer was at the facility and it traveled 10 miles, we need to know if it's spread out further. So that's looking for dispersal of the disease. And then around the facility, that's within 2 to 3 miles around the facility, we really need to get our hands on as many deer as we can, and working with landowners who are already harvesting. I mean, depending on what the deer densities are, if we could get 50 from around the facility, I would feel a little bit better, but that's really going to depend on landowners and if they're willing to supply us with samples. Because right now,
I didn't quite hear you. Did you say 15 or 50?
50, sorry. I was trying not to creep up on you guys. So the immediate facility, like around the vicinity of the facility in 2 to 3 miles, I would be happy. It really does depend on the density, but if we could get upwards of 50 around there, but again, that's working with landowners who are harvesting on their own property and seeing if we can get those samples, because what we need to know is, was there contact, did the disease get outside the fence? So really focusing in around the facility is our first priority, and then getting that larger sample, the 300 plus from the county-wide, to know if any deer dispersed out that had the disease.
All right, do you guys have any more other questions or comments? Otherwise, I would like to entertain a motion.
Chairman Lillard, I'm sorry, with all due respect, I've got a lot of questions that I still think need to be discussed, and like, with regards to the requirements, I saw on the slide deck that Fish and Wildlife has some facility requirements and Department of Ag has facility requirements. Is there published information that shows what those facility requirements are? And then secondarily, are there some type of inspection or evaluation that's available for review to determine if this facility was in compliance or not?
So I have a white paper that I created a decade ago on the regulatory authorities and statutory authorities on both departments and what they do and what that looks like and where that references. I'll be glad to share that with the entire commission so you can see that and look at those regulations. We are the sole jurisdiction on the fence, and we require a fencing inspection every year. That inspection usually happens in January or February. We have been to the facility in question and did a inspection of that perimeter since we since we were alerted on the detection. So we have been on site and looked at that and working with that landowner on those. There was a couple things else. What did I?
Inside the facility.
Inside the facility, that really isn't our place to be, except for the holding of those animals, the space at which they can be held, the capture mechanisms, whether they use a passive restraint system or a dart gun to capture animals, and neither. I mean, it's ultimately the outside that we care about, and what that fence height is.
Yeah, I agree. It's just, and I certainly don't mean to cast aspersions towards any industry, but it's maddening to me when an industry can impact our wild herd and we really don't know what the requirements are that they need to comply with, nor do we, is there an evaluation form that shows this facility is a great facility in compliance with all the regulations and this facility may not be. I think it would help dictate other actions that we might want to try to enforce as a commission, like double fencing and other things of that nature. So I'm hopeful that you will share that, Gabe. I appreciate that information, and I appreciate you all being here sharing this information. Certainly not trying to be critical of you or the agency in any way, but I just feel like I need a lot of information to make a well-informed decision, because we're fixing to potentially have a major impact. And I agree with 90% of the CWD surveillance requirements. I just have a concern around the baiting, because I think it's going to potentially impact hunter participation, harvest rates, which is going to be counterintuitive to getting more deer there to sample to see what the prevalence rate is. So thank you for everything.
Well, we appreciate the questions and the feedback and the open dialogue, and CWD is a very complex issue. It's a complex disease to manage. And then when you're talking about now wild animals and livestock and different authorities and working with other agencies, it's complex. And like Commissioner Storm said, we've been given the opportunity to learn from other agencies and other states on their successes and failures. And we've tried to put together the very best plan that we can to make these recommendations to mitigate the disease. And as we think about this and we move it into the future, and then how we manage it once we've detected it now. And so I think that's a great conversation that we need to have on what does the future look like as time goes along, and that's to be determined. Until we understand what it looks like on the landscape, it's hard for us to make recommendations, and but we are willing to have those conversations and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about it for sure.
And I will add one more thing, Mr. Rhodes. Gabe will share that paper, but if anybody wants to reference our regulation, that's 301 KAR 2083. That's 2083, and that's what we work within. We're bound by that regulation on this issue.
One other thing I'd like, this deer didn't get the disease by itself. It had to get it from another animal somewhere. So I'm more concerned where this deer came from and what's happening to that farm, because it was moved from another farm to this area, right? That bothers me more than this one, because it could have been 2 years that this deer contracted this disease. And all the deer that it came in contact with the other facility where it was at. When I got in this, my number one priority was to protect the wildlife of Kentucky. Second, to help to benefit the hunters. But they're not going to be hunters if we don't have wildlife to hunt. And like I said, I think at a minimum, we need to enact this. Just, if we could lift it at any time if we see that this is not working. But I feel like if we don't enact it, and then things, you know how a wildfire gets started, and then it's out of control. And once you lose control of it, it's hard to ever get it back and, get it put out.
Well, you make a very good point. We're very concerned as well about the movement of deer in and out, and we're still learning a lot about that. And that's really what we're sitting here waiting on. Don't be surprised if we're having similar conversations. If once we determine where other deer have gone, and we look into this, that's going to require more testing on our end once we figure out where deer are going, because we're going to want to increase our sample sizes. So, but again, we can't make any of those decisions yet until we have a lot more information.
All right, gentlemen, I think, we guys all made very good points. Commissioner Rhodes, Commissioner Anger, everybody really got a lot of information out there, and I kind of think that it's time that we kind of look at entertaining a motion here. So that's what I'm doing.
Josh, I have one other concern. Can I speak? This is in my district. And I guess one of the things that concerns me is that, Gabe and Ben have both been up given all the information that they have, but we also don't have all the information. So I guess it concerns me that we're getting ready to make a decision when we don't have all the information. That is going to affect a lot of hunters. That is one of my concerns. I guess I'm kind of like the other commissioner. Right now, my concern is how we affect hunters that are in the mid of their season. If they're a bow hunter or they hunt muzzleloader or whatever, we're in the mid of that season, and we're going to ask them to change their practice in baiting at the drop of a hat. It seems to me that there needs to be a little bit of time to get that information out and to do it in a fashion to where we don't turn law-abiding citizens into people who are breaking the regulation. So I still have that concern.
Thank you, Greg. That's definitely a valid concern. Unfortunately, gentlemen, we're all in a position here that we have to make a decision based on the information that we have at hand. We have to do something about this. And, the way that the motion's going to be, or the action item here that we're going to discuss, is going to, have consequences based on what we do. And so I think that the department's provided us with a lot of information. They provided us with an action plan that we've had in place and what that action plan says that it's going to do. So, we can't always have all the information, and we're going to learn more as this continues to happen, but we have to make a decision now, and I understand that it's not going to be a popular decision as well if we ban baiting. I get that. I mean, I've hunted for a very long time. Personally, I don't hunt over bait anymore, but I have in the past, and I understand how that works. So
I'll go ahead and make the motion to pass.
Okay, so you want to just read it off you want to make the motion based on the action item there?
I'll make the motion to pass approval of the creation of a CWD surveillance zone in Meade, Breckenridge, and Hardin counties.
And then we will need a second.
I'll second it.
Second by Commissioner Rhodes.
No.
Oh, who was that?
Raymer.
Oh, Commissioner Raymer, I apologize. Okay. Greg, can you do a roll call, please?
Discussion?
Yes, sir.
I know, when you're working with a sister agency, you develop that partnership and work that relationship with Fidelity, trying to cultivate, getting the best response. But can we get a commitment from Department of Ag to come and present before the commission, or at least share a report with us? At least make the request from the commission that they share and provide transparency around the facility and what steps they're taking?
Yes, I'll speak to that. I'll make that request and try to expedite that to happen sooner than later, but I can tell you it's not without effort. We have asked for a great deal of information, and perhaps more than they can provide at this point through their investigation. But absolutely, we will make that request.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other discussion before we go to a vote? Okay, Commissioner Cecil, would you mind doing a roll call, please?
All right, Dr. Floyd?
Aye.
Jeff Raymer?
Before I vote, I just want to say that I hate this. I mean, this is one of the worst scenarios that we could have run across right now, and I hate it that it's going to affect hunters. And I just wish it was something else we could do. But
Matt Rose?
Yeah, I'll say this. I'm a proponent of having science and evidence to make well-informed decisions. I don't feel like I have enough here, so I'll abstain.
Greg Cecil? I'm gonna go nay. Josh Lillard, or excuse me, Chuck Meade?
And I would like to explain that we're in difficult times with this CWD, and nobody knows. And I understand the impact that it's going to have on the sportsmen and sportswomen in this district. But I have to weigh in the voice of caution, because we can't allow this to get out of control. And I've had a couple comments on baiting from friends and avid sportsmen, and the regs and laws and regulations that are already in effect does not allow me to take that portion out. And I am an aye, and it's a tough vote, but I am an aye.
All right, looks like the ayes have it 4-1-1.
We still have one more to
Walter.
vote.
Walter.
Well, we need to think about the future of our wildlife, what we need to do. And I'm not really what's going on yet. And there's a lot to think about that, but I'll be an eye on it.
Okay, sorry, Walter. I skipped
Okay.
over you. That makes it 4-1-1.
Okay, so that action item is approved. And again, even for the public that's watching the meeting, or the public that came down to the meeting today, and you can hear in the sentiment from all of the commissioners that had to say something or opposed or abstain. We know that it's a difficult decision, and it's not one that we take lightly. And we will definitely continue to work with the department to get the answers that we need to have. And if there's something that we find out that we can do differently down the road, we will definitely make those changes. All that I can ask is that, as sportsmen and women of the Commonwealth, is that you do everything that you can to help us get the samples that we need, so that we can really understand more about CWD and the surveillance zone area. And with that being said, I would like to entertain a motion for adjournment.
Make a motion for adjournment.
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you everybody for your time today.